In 2002, the last Mazda RX-7 rolled off the line in Hiroshima. No press conference, no farewell tour, just silence. A car that could pull 255 horsepower from an engine smaller than most family sedans. A twin-turbo rotary that screamed to 9,000 RPM with a smoothness no piston engine could match was simply gone. The RX-7 was not discontinued because it failed as a machine. It was killed by forces that had nothing to do with what happened behind the steering wheel. The rotary was never just an engine. It was a philosophy, and when it disappeared, something irreplaceable went with it. To understand what was lost, the story has to start 10 years earlier. September 1992. Mazda unveiled the new RX-7, chassis code FD, to a world that still believed the future belonged to bold ideas. The car looked like nothing else on the road, sleek, impossibly low, sculpted by wind tunnel and obsession. Beneath the skin, the FD's heart was a 1.3-liter twin-turbo rotary engine, the 13B RX-7, a compact spinning triangle that could summon 255 horsepower and rev cleanly past 8,000 revolutions per minute. It wasn't just about numbers. The rotary sat low and far back in the chassis, allowing the FD to achieve a near-perfect 50-50 weight split, 49.5% front, 50.5% rear. The result was a car that felt alive in your hands, eager to change direction, telegraphing every nuance of the road through a steering rack that needed no electronic filter between driver and tarmac. Mazda's engineers, led by designers who saw the rotary as a calling, built the FD around the idea of purity. The 13B RO was lighter than any comparable piston engine, freeing the team to chase balance and response over raw displacement. The car's twin sequential turbos delivered power in two waves, the first for instant throttle, the second for a surge at higher revs. On paper, it outperformed rivals with twice the cylinders and half the soul. The 255 horsepower figure, measured at 6,500 revolutions per minute, translated into a specific output of 196 PS per liter, a number that left even European exotics in the dust. The FD's red line, marked clearly at 8,500 revolutions per minute on the tachometer, was both a badge of honor and a warning. Pushing a rotary that far required confidence, not just in the driver, but in the metal itself. Every detail served the same purpose, to make the driver feel connected. The pedals were spaced for heel and toe downshifts, the shifter moved with a light mechanical precision, and the view over the curved fenders gave a sense of motion, even at a standstill. Mazda's launch brochures promised a machine that would respond as an extension of your body. Road testers agreed. The FD danced through corners, its chassis settling instantly, its engine spinning with a silkiness that no piston could match. There was a sense that nothing was wasted, that every gram and every watt had been placed with intent. But even as the car dazzled the press and captivated a generation of enthusiasts, the engineers knew they were walking a tightrope. The rotary's compactness and smoothness came at a price, a secret that hid in the engine's core, waiting for heat and stress to reveal it. Mazda launched the FD with optimism, but also with caution. The official red line was not just a target for thrill seekers, it was a boundary set by hard-won experience. Inside the boardrooms, some wondered if the rotary's brilliance could survive the world outside the test track. The FD RX-7 arrived as a statement of intent, a car built by people who believed that driving should be an act of joy. Yet, underneath the surface, there was already a hint of vulnerability. Mazda's engineers had chosen the rotary not by accident, but by conviction, fully aware that their masterpiece was as fragile as it was beautiful. To understand why they bet everything on this engine, the story has to go back further than 1992, to a time when the rotary was more than a technical curiosity. It was a promise and a gamble. Mazda's romance with the rotary engine began in the 1960s, long before turbochargers and wind tunnels shaped the RX-7's silhouette. In 1967, the Cosmo Sport rolled out of Hiroshima, a low-slung coupe with a spinning triangle under its hood, humming at 9,000 RPM, while piston engines of the day gasped for breath. The rotary was more than a mechanical curiosity. It was Mazda's answer to a world dominated by giants. Where others chased displacement and brute force, Mazda chased smoothness, compactness, and a kind of mechanical poetry. The Wankel rotary, with its spinning rotor and lack of reciprocating pistons, promised vibration-free power and a featherweight package. It could be mounted low and far back, bringing the center of gravity closer to the driver's hips, and it spun to the stratosphere with a silkiness that pistons simply could not match. This commitment was not a passing flirtation. By the late 1960s, Mazda had poured vast sums into licensing, developing, and refining the rotary. The company built entire assembly lines around the engine, trained engineers who saw it as more than just a job, and bet the brand's future on making it work. The Cosmo Sport was just the beginning. Through the 1970s and the 1980s, Mazda doubled down. RX-2, RX-3, RX-4, and the first RX-7 all carried the torch. Each model wore the rotary as a badge of honor, even as rival automakers quietly abandoned their own rotary experiments, citing durability headaches and soaring warranty costs. Mazda's institutional obsession with the rotary ran deep. Engineers in Hiroshima became masters of the subtle art of balancing oil consumption, heat management, and seal geometry. The company's R&D budget absorbed blow after blow, funding new alloys and oil injection systems, chasing the elusive goal of apex seal longevity. By the time the FD RX-7 was conceived, Mazda had invested so much, financially, culturally, and emotionally, that abandoning the rotary would have meant tearing out a piece of its own identity. The payoff was real, at least on paper. The rotary's compact size allowed for design freedoms no piston engine could match. The FD's near-perfect weight balance, its low hood line, and its famously responsive chassis, all traced back to the engine's unique shape and mounting position. The 13B Ryu's ability to spin above 8,000 RPM without the shudder of reciprocating mass gave the RX-7 a character that felt almost electric. Mazda's marketing leaned into this, promising a driving experience that was pure, immediate, and unlike anything else on the road. For a while, the world believed them. But every investment comes with a shadow. Mazda's devotion to the rotary meant years of sunk costs, specialized supply chains, and a workforce trained for a technology the rest of the industry had left behind. The company had built its house on the rotary's smooth, high-revving song, but cracks were already beginning to show beneath the surface. The FD RX-7, for all its brilliance, was the product of a company that had gone all in on a single fragile idea. Soon, forces far outside the engineering lab would test just how much that commitment was really worth. In the late 1980s, Mazda's boardroom brimmed with confidence. The company's fiscal report for the year ending March 1989 delivered a number that seemed almost unreal, a 208% jump in pre-tax profit. It was a time when Japan's asset bubble made risk feel like a distant memory, and every major automaker scrambled to outdo the next with new models, new technologies, and bold experiments. For Mazda, the windfall translated into a $3 billion expansion plan, the largest in its history. Factories in Hiroshima and Hofu buzzed with activity. New platforms were greenlit with little hesitation, and engineers were given broad mandates to chase ideas that would have been considered reckless just a few years earlier. Inside Mazda's headquarters, executives spoke in the language of growth. The plan called for not just one or two new models, but a portfolio explosion, luxury sedans, family coupes, K-cars, and at the top, a new rotary-powered flagship that would become the FD RX-7. Model proliferation became a point of pride. By the dawn of the 1990s, Mazda's global lineup swelled to more than twice its size from just a decade prior. The company even flirted with launching an all-new luxury brand, a Mati, to take on Lexus and Infiniti. The expansion was not just about cars, it was about staking a claim in every segment, filling every niche, and proving that Mazda could stand shoulder to shoulder with Japan's giants. This era of abundance had its own logic. With land values and stock prices climbing at double-digit rates, executives believed the future would reward those who moved fastest and dreamed biggest. Research and development budgets ballooned. Engineers working on the rotary program saw their requests for new alloys, turbocharger designs, and oil injection systems approved with little pushback. Specialized tooling for the 13B Ryu engine was ordered in bulk, Even as whispers of risk began to circulate in the financial press, inside Mazda, the prevailing mood was optimism bordering on hubris. The company's annual reports from this period read like manifestos: innovation, expansion, and an almost defiant belief in the rotary as the cornerstone of Mazda's identity. Yet, the sheer scale of Mazda's investment carried a hidden cost. The $3 billion expansion locked the company into a web of long-term commitments, from new assembly lines to exclusive supplier contracts for rotary-specific components. Every new model, every additional platform, multiplied the complexity of Mazda's operations. The rotary, with its unique demands, required a supply chain that no other automaker in Japan maintained. Apex seals, rotor housings, turbochargers, each had to be sourced, tested, and assembled to standards that were both exacting and expensive. For a brief, dazzling moment, it seemed as if nothing could go wrong. The numbers on the balance sheet justified every risk. Mazda's leadership looked at the swelling profits and saw only confirmation that their bets were paying off. But the logic of expansion is a double-edged sword. When the bubble finally burst, the very abundance that had fueled Mazda's rise would become the source of its greatest vulnerability. The FD RX-7, conceived in a climate of limitless ambition, was about to face a world that no longer rewarded boldness, but punished it. Japan's asset bubble burst in the early 90s, erasing nearly 70% of corporate asset value in months. Mazda's $3 billion expansion plan, once a symbol of boundless optimism, became a burden overnight. Credit vanished, and banks demanded repayment. The financial safety net that had fueled Mazda's boldest projects, including the FD RX-7, disappeared almost instantly. Inside Mazda's finance committee, the mood hardened. Urgent memos circulated between Hiroshima and Tokyo, spelling out a new order. Every yen spent had to be justified. Projects, no matter how celebrated, faced a cold calculus. The rotary program, once a point of pride, now looked like a liability. The FD's specialized tooling and supply chain, built for a low-volume, high-cost engine, became glaring expenses. Each apex seal, each turbocharger, now carried a price tag that could no longer be ignored. Mazda's research and development budget, swollen during the bubble years, came under the microscope. Discretionary spending disappeared. Engineers who once received easy approvals for new alloys and turbo designs now saw their requests denied with blunt notes. Defer until profitability improves. The rotary's unique demands, hand-fitted seals, custom housings, and precise oil injection, shifted from engineering marvels to financial drains. Even routine maintenance costs became battlegrounds. Warranty claims for the FD's engine, once absorbed as the cost of innovation, now stood out as red ink on quarterly reports. The numbers were unforgiving. The FD's unit cost soared as production shrank, with specialized equipment costs spread over fewer cars. Unlike rivals with piston engines, Mazda could not dilute expenses across a broad lineup. Internal models showed that, at current sales, the FD would never recoup its development costs. One memo summed up the new mood. Rotary program, high risk under current cash flow constraints. Every department felt the pressure. Product planners shelved low-volume variants. Marketing budgets for the RX-7 were cut to the bone. Supplier contracts were renegotiated, sometimes at the expense of quality or delivery. Even the engineering team, fiercely loyal to the rotary, sensed the ground shifting. The FD RX-7, born in an era of abundance, now had to justify its existence in a world ruled by austerity. Consumer confidence collapsed alongside corporate wealth. Buyers who once lined up for exotic sports cars grew cautious. Financing a high-maintenance coupe became a luxury few could afford. Showroom traffic for the RX-7 slowed, and unsold cars piled up. The FD remained a marvel on the road, but the economic climate outside the factory had turned hostile. In the boardroom, survival replaced ambition. The rotary's brilliance could no longer hide from the balance sheet. As Mazda's finances deteriorated, outside voices pressed for change. The age of unchecked ambition was over. The FD RX-7, once Mazda's boldest dream, now faced a future dictated by accountants and corporate strategists. At the heart of the 13B Ryu rotary, the real test was not in the boost or the red line, but at the razor-thin edge where the apex seals met the housing. Each rotation forced these seals to contain a controlled explosion, scraping across a chamber that routinely soared beyond 800 degrees Celsius. That is a temperature most piston engines never see, hot enough to soften steel, to break down protective oil, to turn a precision part into a liability. The apex seal, often called the rotary's weak link, was asked to endure searing heat, relentless friction, and crushing pressure, thousands of times each minute, for years on end. Mazda's engineers faced this challenge head-on. In the lab, they watched seal face temperatures spike past 800 degrees Celsius during dyno pulls, then inspected the aftermath, scored housings, fine cracks, and the deep claw-like scars that told the story of metal pushed to its limits. To keep the seals alive, they did not just rely on oil splashed around the engine. The rotary used a dedicated oil injection system, metering out between 0.5 and 0.8 quarts per 1,000 miles. Almost a full quart burned every 1,000 miles, not by accident, but by necessity. Oil consumption was not a flaw. It was a calculated trade-off for survival. The margin for error was slim. Drop below 0.5 quarts per 1,000 miles, and the seals would run dry, overheating and wearing out at double speed. Push too much oil, and emissions would spike, threatening regulatory approval. Mazda's service manual spelled out the balancing act: enough oil to absorb up to 150 kilowatts of heat at the seal edge, but not so much that it overwhelmed the catalytic converter or left a trail of blue smoke. Every FD RX-7 left the factory with this compromise built in. Owners learned to monitor oil levels obsessively. Track enthusiasts accepted higher oil loss for longer seal life, adding catch cans or thicker oil. Others, surprised by the rotary's appetite, faced rebuilds as soon as 80,000 kilometers. Warranty data from the 1990s showed about 12% of FD engines needed apex seal work each year, a rate piston engines rarely matched. Each repair was a reminder. The rotary's brilliance demanded constant vigilance. In Hiroshima, engineers pushed metallurgy and oiling technology as far as they could, but the laws of physics always pushed back. Every time an FD RX-7 left the showroom, a silent clock started ticking beneath its sculpted hood. The rotary's appetite for oil and its hunger for high revs were not just quirks, they were recurring expenses, tallied in owner logs and Mazda's own warranty databases. For many, the first sign of trouble came as a faint loss of power, a puff of blue smoke, or a compression test that did not lie. When the apex seals finally gave up, the bill arrived, a full engine rebuild often priced between $3,000 and $10,000, depending on the year, the shop, and whether the owner insisted on factory parts or trusted a specialist. This was not a rare event. Warranty data from the 1990s and the early 2000s reveals that about 12% of FD engines needed apex seal work each year. That's a rate far higher than what Nissan or Toyota owners faced with their piston-powered sports cars. For a buyer, the RX-7's sticker price was only the beginning. The true cost revealed itself at 80,000 kilometers, or sometimes sooner for those who lived near the red line. Even careful owners, those who measured oil by the half quart and warmed up religiously, found themselves budgeting for a rebuild as part of regular ownership. Shops specializing in rotaries became both lifeline and warning sign. They filled with engines waiting for new seals, housings, and sometimes entire rotor assemblies. Stories spread through enthusiast circles, like Kyoko Tanaka's 600,000 yen rebuild at 85,000 kilometers, fueling a reputation that stuck. The RX-7 was a thrill, but a fragile one. Resale values reflected this. As word got out, used FDs began to lose ground to rivals, their prices dipping as buyers calculated the risk of a looming repair bill. Even pristine examples, with dealer stamps and careful logs, carried a cloud of uncertainty. For every enthusiast willing to take the gamble, there were many who walked away, wary of the costs hidden behind the car's beauty. Mazda too felt the weight. Each warranty claim chipped away at profitability, turning a flagship into a liability. The company's own risk models flagged the FD as a high-cost outlier. especially as sales volumes fell and each rebuild became a larger share of total expenses. The rotary's unique engineering, once a point of pride, had become a line item in the red. In the end, the real-world costs, dollars spent, reputations bruised, confidence eroded, forced Mazda to see the RX-7 not as a halo, but as a hard lesson in the price of chasing perfection. May 20th, 1996, a single transaction on the Tokyo Stock Exchange redrew the boundaries of Mazda's future. Ford Motor Company, already a major partner, raised its stake to 33.4%, enough to claim effective control. Boardroom minutes captured the mood in a single phrase spoken by Ford's newly installed president Henry Wallace: "Change or die." The message was blunt, and it left no room for ambiguity. Mazda, battered by years of shrinking profits facing a ballooning cost structure, would now answer to a new set of priorities. The FD RX-7, with its hand-built engine and bespoke supply chain, suddenly found itself under a microscope. Ford's team arrived in Hiroshima with spreadsheets and a mandate. Every model had to justify its existence, not just in engineering terms, but in dollars and cents. The days of chasing purity for its own sake were over. Ford's internal cost analysis compared the FD's per-unit cost, nearly 4.8 million yen, with the projected 3.2 million yen for a shared platform coupe based on the Probe or MX-6. The difference, 1.6 million yen per car, was impossible to ignore at a time when Mazda's cash reserves were dangerously thin. Ford's strategy called for global platforms, shared parts, and economies of scale. In that world, a low-volume rotary sports car looked less like a flagship and more like a liability. The RX-7's unique engine, once a symbol of Mazda's independence, became a red flag in every cost synergy meeting. Engineering resources that had been reserved for rotary development were now earmarked for projects that could be sold on 3 continents, not just to a handful of enthusiasts. Executives who had spent their careers defending the rotary were forced to defend it in a new language, one of quarterly returns and platform efficiency. The boardroom debates grew sharper. Ford's directors, armed with models that projected a 4.5% margin boost if the rotary line was shut down, pressed for action. Mazda's own leadership, still loyal to the car that defined their brand, found themselves outnumbered and outvoted. The FD RX-7 was not killed by a single memo or a dramatic showdown. Instead, it was suffocated by a slow, methodical shift in governance. The change or die slogan hung over every meeting, a reminder that sentiment had no place in the new order. The rotary's fate was sealed not by a flaw in the metal, but by a balance sheet and a corporate mandate that saw no room for outliers. In the end, the car that once embodied Mazda's boldest dreams became a casualty of someone else's bottom line. Mazda's finance team gathered around spreadsheets that told a story few wanted to read. Each FD RX-7 rolling out of Hiroshima cost nearly 4.8 million yen to build, almost 1.5 million yen more than a platform-shared coupe like the MX-6 or Ford Probe. The gap was not just a rounding error. Every car that left the line pulled Mazda further from profitability, even as the company's cash reserves shrank. The numbers were stark. A rotary-powered flagship demanded specialized tooling, hand-fit apex seals, and a supply chain that could not piggyback on any other model. The FD's engine, the 13B Roo, required bespoke components that no other car in Mazda's lineup could use. In a world moving toward global platforms and shared architectures, the RX-7 stood isolated, technically brilliant, but financially exposed. Cost-benefit sheets circulated between Hiroshima and Ford's Detroit offices. The cold calculus was impossible to ignore. If Mazda switched to a shared platform, the per-unit cost would drop to around 3.2 million yen. That 1.6 million yen difference, multiplied across every car, was enough to tip the balance sheet from loss to survival. Ford's internal models projected a 4.5% margin boost if the rotary program was wound down and resources redirected to global projects. In meetings, the rotary was no longer discussed as an engineering marvel, but as a line item dragging down quarterly returns. By the turn of the millennium, the writing was on the wall. The FD RX-7's global run had already been curtailed. Emissions and cost pressures had pushed it out of North America and Europe. Only the Japanese market held on, and even there, volumes dwindled to a trickle. The finance team's final reports for 2001 made it clear. The rotary's cost structure could not survive in a world ruled by platform economics. The last hope came in the form of the 2002 Spirit R, a hand-assembled limited run of just 500 cars. Each one cost Mazda more than 5 million yen to produce, an act of defiance, or perhaps a farewell letter written in steel and oil. There was no dramatic announcement, no public reckoning. The FD simply faded away. Its production line shuttered with little fanfare. Inside Mazda, the silence was heavy. The decision was not just about money. It was about admitting that the ideals that shaped the RX-7 no longer fit the world Mazda had to survive in. The cost synergy calculus was final. The FD RX-7 ended not with a bang, but with a balance sheet. What remained was a legend and a question. What do you lose when you let the accountants win? Step into the cockpit of an FD RX-7, and the first thing you notice isn't horsepower or price. It's the feeling that every surface, every control was built for hands and feet, not for algorithms. The thin-rimmed steering wheel sits close, textured just enough to remind you where the grip begins and ends. The gauges, simple and deeply hooded, sweep in arcs that echo the engine's own rhythm. Each switch, each dial, moves with a mechanical click, not a digital beep. Owners talk about the way the shifter slots home, the clutch's bite point, the pedal layout that lets you roll through heel and toe downshifts without thinking. It's analog in the truest sense. Every input comes back as a sensation, not a number on a screen. Longtime owners describe the FD as a car that demands presence. There is no traction control, no drive modes to filter out mistakes. The feedback is immediate and sometimes unforgiving. But that is the appeal. In an era when most cars were gaining weight, complexity, and insulation, the RX-7 doubled down on simplicity. The cabin is tight, almost intimate, with seats that hug more than they cushion. The view over the hood curves is pure theater, fenders rising and falling in your line of sight, tracking every nuance of the road. Collectors haven't forgotten. Prices for clean FDs have climbed steadily since the late 2010s, with some low-mileage examples fetching more than double their original sticker. Enthusiasts pay not just for speed, but for a kind of experience that modern cars rarely offer. Testimonials from owners, some with the same car for 20 years, tell of early morning drives, the sound of the rotary spinning toward redline, the way the car seems to shrink around you on a winding road. What is being preserved isn't just a machine, but a philosophy, the belief that driving should be tactile, direct, and deeply personal. When the FD disappeared, it took that analog clarity with it, leaving behind a longing that numbers on a spec sheet can't satisfy. Mazda's rotary dream did not end in 2002. The silence that followed the FD's exit left a mark, but it never erased the idea. In the years that followed, engineers in Hiroshima kept a flame alive, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a public nod. The rotary, once the core of Mazda's identity, became a kind of echo, not a comeback, but a persistent question. Could the world ever make room for a spinning triangle again? In 2023, that echo took a new shape. Mazda released the MX-30 REV, a compact crossover with a twist. Under the hood, a small rotary engine sits not as the main event, but as a generator, a range extender for an electric drivetrain. It is a far cry from the days of redlines and apex seals, scraping at 8,000 revolutions per minute. The rotary here does not drive the wheels or chase lap times. Instead, it quietly hums in the background, charging batteries, almost apologetic in its role. Yet for the engineers who grew up idolizing the FD, its presence means something. The badge on the fender is more than nostalgia. It is a signal that Mazda still sees value in doing things differently. Mazda's current leadership, when pressed, insists that the rotary is not just a relic. They talk about efficiency, about compactness, about the unique way a rotary can fit where others cannot. But there is also a sense of unfinished business, a quiet defiance against a market that rewards only the safest bets. The MX-30R EV is not a sports car, and it does not pretend to be. Yet it carries a piece of the old philosophy, reimagined for a world obsessed with emissions targets and plug-in charging stations. That is the strange legacy of the RX-7. Its spirit lingers, not in horsepower wars or Nürburgring lap times, but in the willingness to try what others will not. The rotary survives, not as the hero, but as a whisper. Whether that whisper will ever become a roar again is a question Mazda seems unwilling to answer, but equally unwilling to let go. Today, as automakers chase ever tighter emissions and digital control, the RX-7's analog defiance feels more radical than ever. The cruel irony remains. Uncompromising engineering cannot shield a machine from market logic or boardroom mandates. In a world obsessed with optimization, the purest ideas often vanish first. What's lost isn't just a car, it's the audacity to build for feeling, not just function. If this story moved you, consider subscribing and join the conversation below.